Hi, and welcome to Managers One-on-One, a podcast about being your best as a manager at Microsoft. I'm Nicole Christie, a writer and producer on the employee communications team, and with me is Christina Watt.
That's me, Christina Watt, Director of Global HR, Manager, and Learning and Development Communications. In this podcast, we talk with Microsoft managers about their journey managing people, their successes, failures, and the joys and challenges of empowering people to be their best.
In this episode, we're talking with Kathleen Hogan. Kathleen has been with Microsoft for 18 years and held a variety of senior leadership roles in sales and services before becoming our Chief People Officer in 2015. Kathleen and the HR team introduced the Manager Expectations Model Coach and Care in 2019 and could never have imagined how critical they would be in managing through the global pandemic that gripped our world just a few months later. We're looking forward to this conversation with Kathleen and hearing more about how Microsoft managers have delivered success through such extraordinary times, what's next in the coming year, and Kathleen's own journey as a manager, as well as her perspective on how our culture and the role of the manager have evolved.
Hi, Kathleen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm super excited. Thank you.
So, Kathleen, we'd love to start by talking about your journey at Microsoft. So you've been at the company now for 18 years in senior leadership roles in customer support, our consulting services team, and now as Chief People Officer. What's the story of how you came to lead HR?
So the story of how Satya actually asked me to be the head of HR is I was actually driving to my sister Caroline's birthday. My sister Kathleen had picked me up at the airport, and we were driving to surprise her for her birthday. So I know it was in September. And Colleen's daughter was in the back listening to Brady Bunch reruns. And the phone rings and Satya calls. And I said, "Oh, Colleen, it's the CEO. Do you mind if I take this call?" And she's like telling Catherine, "Shh, be quiet, be quiet." And of course, Catherine doesn't care that Satya Nadella's on the phone. You know, the Brady Bunch is on. And so I'm like in the corner of the window trying to listen with my hand over the phone. And Satya said, "I really wanted to ask you if you would help me. I really was wondering if you'd be willing to come in and help me and lead HR. And one of my priorities is really evolving the culture." So that's the story of how he asked. And I said yes. And it was just an incredible opportunity to step into this role.
Wow. And you've seen so much change in this role. So tell us more about the journey that we've been on with our culture.
Boy, it's a long story. I'll try to net it out. In fact, I just met with a customer yesterday who was asking for that story. And I think people continue to be intrigued about the story. And yet, as I always remind anybody that I'm talking with, 85% of companies are trying to change their culture, and about 30% would say they've been successful. And so you want to be super humble about learnings and things that you think are moving you forward, and yet also recognizing that there are things that have made you take steps backwards, and also the journey continues. Culture isn't something you freeze and unfreeze. It's something you earn every day. But if I think back to that September timeframe and then starting in the role, we really spent about 9 months really trying to define the Aspire to culture. So I think the key point is we didn't just make it up or come up with it overnight. It was a process. And I would say that Satya had at least this sense of the growth mindset very early on. He was reading the book Mindset by Dr. Dweck. He was reading it in his personal life. He had mentioned it to me. I read it and I said, wow, there's some incredible concepts in here that really resonate. But in parallel, we were doing research with different external advisors. We were doing focus groups with people across the company and trying to take different cuts: sales, engineering, millennials, non-millennials, US, non-US, men, women, looking at it from lots of different angles to make sure what the from to was something that would really resonate across the company. And without going through the whole process, we involved the SLT, we involved our CVPs at exec staff. Again, we were doing the focus groups. To net it out, 9 months later, we did ultimately decide to define our Aspire to culture, which for those who maybe are new, we grounded our culture in a growth mindset and then really said we wanted to focus that growth mindset on being more customer obsessed, truly diverse and inclusive, and then really acting as one Microsoft. And all of that was in service to something we thought was still from our roots as a company, which was making a difference, using technology to make a difference in the lives of people and the lives of companies. So that was sort of the first 9 months. And then I would say ever since we declared that, and Satya declared it at an all hands, he even declared it at the shareholder meeting, which was pretty unique to assert the Aspire to culture and that we wanted to move from a bunch of know-it-alls to a bunch of learn-it-alls. I would say since then, we've been trying to take steps every year to close that gap between what we're espousing with that Aspire to culture and the lived experience of 160, 180,000 plus employees.
And Kathleen, managers really are instrumental to living our culture and bringing it to life. And that's something we've really defined at Microsoft over the last couple of years. In 2019, we introduced the Manager Expectations Model Coaching Care for our managers to help clarify their role for them. So looking back at the culture journey that you've just illustrated, we'd love to hear about how those expectations were developed.
I do have a story about that. Just to put it in context, first, we spent a lot of time really defining that Aspire to culture that I just talked about and equal time on our mission. And I think it's really important that we were clear about our culture in service to that mission. And while the CSAs have evolved over time, while our worldview has evolved over time, the strategy will continue to evolve over time, those anchors of that culture in service to that mission and really being clear on that was really important. So we defined that. Then it really was about our leadership principles. What do we really aspire from leadership at all levels and from all people? Leadership doesn't equal being a manager. And so those were the principles around create clarity, generate energy, and deliver success. But then we came to this, to your question, what do we uniquely expect from being a manager? And I had invited, I think it was Amy Hood, Chris Kapp, our CMO, Jason Zander with Azure, Jean-Philippe, who was running our global field organization, to join me in really coming up with our manager expectations. And as you can imagine, there's 50 different things you could come up with for what managers are expected to do. There are a lot of books written. And the first time I presented to the SLT, the first draft of what we came up with, one of my SLT colleagues was brave enough to say, this is not your best work. And I reflect on that, though, because I really appreciate that my colleague didn't just say, oh, let's just rubber stamp this because this isn't my problem, but that they said, no, we can do better. Let's strive to have something that is actually better. And so we had a good discussion around that. And that obligation to dissent, I really respected. So we went back, and I remember the 5 of us got in a room and we had 10 cards of things we thought were important. And we said, okay, each of us picked the top 3. And it was amazing, the overlap in terms of if you really had to net it out, what's the really core things? If we really were going to emphasize 3 things and try to do 3 things well versus tell people 10 things or even 8 things to do, what would it be? And ultimately we came up with model, coach. I will tell you, those were the 2 clear ones. But then this care was the last one. And I was most excited when we landed on care because I really felt, gosh, if we could unlock this notion that you become a people manager, not because you want to get promoted, but because you truly want to help people realize their potential. And to do that, you have to care about them, not be their best friend, but care about them, their needs, their strengths, their weaknesses, their challenges outside of work to help them realize their potential. That was that third element. And when we landed on that and we presented it to the SLT, we got unanimous support. When we went to present at the employee all hands, when we used to get to do those in person, it was great to have Amy Hood talk about it, to have Jason Zander talk about it, to have others talk about it. So it was a shared expectation across the SLT and not just something that, quote, HR was driving.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear a little bit about each of the expectations. Let's start with modeling and go a little bit deeper into that because modeling can be good and bad.
I think in terms of an example of not good modeling, let me draw from outside of Microsoft, although, as I said, we're trying to close the gap. And so there's definitely no perfection here. I'll share a story with you about an experience I had with my first manager. Not a good experience. It was right before college, and my dad had decided it would be great for me to work at a factory to really get motivated going off to college. So I'm on an assembly line with 3 Laotians who had recently immigrated into Wisconsin, and they were working on this assembly line with me. And one of us took the Tupperware containers, one of us put the label on the container, one of us put it through the saran wrap machine, and then one of us took them off the conveyor belt and put 12 in a box and taped the box. And so that's what we did all day long. And so I thought, well, wow, if we're just standing here doing this all day, wouldn't it be great if I helped them learn English, which they were excited about? And so we were on the assembly line, 1, 1, 2, 2, 17, 17. We're going through things. And the manager, quote, so-called manager, another trivia fact is he wore a shirt that said "Party till you puke." So I can picture
great
him.
modeling.
Yeah, I can picture that. He had 5 different colors, but they all said that. But that was his uniform. Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. He came over and he's like, "No talking, no talking." And I said, "Well, why no talking?" He didn't answer the question, just said no talking. So he leaves, and maybe 2 days later, I'm bored on the assembly line, and I start talking again. And he moved me off the assembly line, and I got moved to a riveting beer signs by myself. So I literally riveted beer signs by myself in the corner for a month. I gutted it out and I landed the job. But I'll never forget that manager. And I'll never forget what one person said to me that day. As we were walking out, I could see her from a distance. She sat on a different assembly line where she was painting these Christmas tree ornament holders. I happened to run into her on the way out, walking out the door. And she says to me, "Honey, if you're looking for your purpose, you're going to have to look outside these 4 walls."
Wow.
And I think back on that and you think, gosh, right? How hard if every day you come to work and you feel that way, that your purpose has to be outside the 4 walls of where you work, that your manager views you as somebody just get the job done versus has any empathy for you. So that would be a really bad example. That was my first manager. I think it has really stuck with me all these years.
I think it's going to stick with me now, too. That's a good story.
So I've gone from that manager to now, and I'll tell you my first story with Satya as my manager. I had come into role, I'm running HR. We had decided to outsource part of our recruiting function, and it was not going well. We weren't able to schedule interviews. At the first exec staff meeting, somebody stood up and said, "Kathleen, are you aware of how messed up this is?" I felt like I was on my heels. And I went to Satya and I said, "Look, I'm not going to ask you to read my emails in general, but would you read just this one? Because I'm going to explain that we made a mistake. I'm going to explain that we're going to have to roll this back. I'm going to ask for their patience as we do this. And I just want to make sure I got the tone right." And of course, the team's waiting. I'm going to have this meeting, holding their breath. And I can picture Satya standing there. He has a standing desk. I'm watching him read the email. My heart rate's elevated a little bit. And he turns to me and he says, "You're too apologetic. You guys made a mistake. You've learned, you're reversing the decision. Just assert that and move on." And I'll never forget that moment coming back and telling the team. And it was like a weight was lifted off their shoulder. And I really do think that we went on to do some really exciting things in recruiting and take some risks that the team may not have felt empowered to do, given that, quote, role modeling of if you make a mistake and you own it and you learn from it and you correct it, you can recover from that.
Well, and in a way, you could say he was also coaching you there, too. So what are you seeing throughout the organization show up around coaching?
I think the key shift, and it was interesting, I just did this meeting at Manpower, and it was myself and Jean-Philippe was on with me. He presented, and then I presented, and so I got to listen to Jean-Philippe, and he really talked about this huge shift from more of a tops down, go do, thank you for your input, to more of this coaching model. Really getting curious and asking for the context first, asking why the person did it that way, even if you disagree. I think the other key thing, especially as I think about right now, managers really coaching to prioritize what really is essential. What can you let go of? What's at the top of the list, just given the workload that people have been experiencing.
So have you had some times in your career where you've been coached well beyond Satya?
Yes. I remember my first development manager when I was at Oracle. And I had come into Oracle right out of college. I had actually been slated to do marketing. My degree was in applied math and economics, even though I'd taken CS classes, but it wasn't in computer science. And so apparently that got me slated to marketing. And so when I showed up for the orientation, I really had to advocate for myself to be a developer, that I really wanted to be a developer. But I think in my mind, because I had to sort of fight for that, there was always that sense of, gosh, can I succeed in this role? And I got lucky because Julie Butterfield was my first development manager, and she really created this safe space for me to ask questions and didn't make me feel like I was stupid. I hadn't figured it out yet. I guess in retrospect, as I tell the story, she absolutely had the growth mindset and really coached me. And I ended up becoming a development manager myself. And as I tell the story, it makes me reflect on the power of her creating that safe space, being a great coach, letting me ask questions, coach me so I learn versus just telling me how to do things. That was what Julie was great at. I would come, and I remember I was trying to do this pick list program, right? And I hadn't figured it out, but she coached me versus just gave me the answer. And in coaching me through it, then I learned how to do it and I got better. If I think of another great manager, when I first came to Microsoft, my first manager was Kevin Johnson, who has gone on to become the CEO of Starbucks, for those of you who don't know Kevin Johnson. But he was my first manager. And the thing I think about Kevin that he really instilled in me is this notion of having joy in the job as a manager. It was so much fun to work with Kevin. I mean, we had hard things we worked on, but there was always the sense of humor, of context, of not taking anything too seriously. I remember the first time that he presented at MGX, which at the time was our big global sales event, and he played a practical joke over 3 days on me and 3 team members, and take a long time to tell the practical joke. But the idea that as he is having to present and all of the stress of that, he was still having fun and playing a practical joke and keeping it lighthearted.
I don't know about you, Nicole, but now I'm dying to know. So, Kathleen.
Well,
there's a cliffhanger part 2 that has to happen.
I'll try to net it out. But the essence was he had shared with myself and 2 others that his brilliant idea was that we should come out as Shrek characters, right? And I would dress up as the princess, which I thought that was great until I realized the princess had a green face. And then, of course, my colleague who was going to be the donkey was really not down with this. They were like, wait, Kevin's this, you coming out like Shrek? I don't think this is what you want. But he played it so well that he was serious that he had us going for a while. That's the essence of the practical joke. But
oh, I love it. And it's so true that in the moment, humor is so necessary, and yet not everybody realizes how to work with that. It can be seen as you're not taking things as seriously as you should, when in fact, it helps everyone to do their best work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's, as you say, it's finding the right balance. Nobody wants a comedian every day or somebody who makes light of things that are very serious. But it's remembering to have that joy in the job and have fun and not take things too seriously that don't need to be taken so seriously.
And I think part of that, having a little bit of humor and recognizing joy, it's also part of caring. And you mentioned earlier that you were so glad that we landed on care as one of the manager expectations. I think care has never been more important than it has for the last couple of years. None of us could have seen how important that was going to be in the role of the manager. So I would love to hear some stories about what it means to care.
Just as you were saying that, and I was reflecting on the last 18 months, I'd want to just lead with a huge thank you to our managers. It really has been so inspiring to see our managers step up and care in small ways, but also care in very big, profound ways. And when we came up with Model Coach Care, we thought that it would be super important. But boy, on the heels of COVID and everything that we've faced, I think it's been even more important. In fact, I was talking about inspiration. I actually literally have a folder. It's called my inspiration folder. And when I get mails from employees, that inspire me, I put them in this inspiration folder. There was one person who sent me a mail. I had posted something on LinkedIn that apparently I put in there that I was a single mom. I am a single mom, but I apparently mentioned that. I hadn't thought about that except for I mentioned it. But apparently that meant a lot to her. And she sent me a note about the fact that she was a single mom and how much her manager empowered her to be a single mom and still be great at her job. And I could read the letter, but it was like one of those letters that I put in my inspiration folder because this manager made a huge difference for this single mom in caring. Again, she still did her job. She still did her job well, but his ability to connect with her and help flex and mix shift during the day to allow her to do both. It's the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or made a huge difference for her. I got another mail. You talk about just the last year and how hard it's been. And we've had this campaign, It's Okay Not to Be Okay. And I got a mail from an employee who said his manager was really talking proactively about it's okay not to be okay. And she was really talking about that every month. And he kind of thought, oh, come on, why are you talking about this? Until then, he had his own personal crisis. And he was so grateful that she had cared enough to tell them about it, because then when it happened to him, he felt very empowered to share with her, to avail himself of the benefits he needed. And that went in the inspiration folder too. There are just so many examples like that. And I would say it's big, profound moments of care when somebody's navigating a death in the family, a health crisis, a mental health challenge themselves. And then it's also small moments of caring. Part of what I get to do in this role is interview folks who are on the path to be a CVP. So these are senior folks. And one person I talked with had been with the company and was celebrating their 25-year anniversary. And instead of just sending a thank you note, their manager amidst COVID had organized a parade of cars to go by in the neighborhood with balloons and honking the horns, and people came out. And it was this beautiful moment that he got to share with his family. So it's things like that too that make a difference.
You know, you have a lot on your shoulders in your role, and you approach it with such compassion and such obvious care. Have you had moments where maybe you haven't felt okay?
Yeah, absolutely is the answer. I think that we all go through ebbs and flows of when you're feeling great and you're on fire and it's all clicking for you. And then you have these other times where it's like, gosh, how can I make it all work? I remember one week was particularly difficult. And it was a week at work where I'm sure there was stuff going on at home in terms of just helping my son who was navigating high school and all of that. But from a work part, there were just several examples that week where I felt like we were failing in terms of closing that gap between the Aspire to culture and the lived experiences that I was hearing about from employees. So on Friday in our SLT meeting, we meet every Friday as an SLT. And we're doing a check-in that day. We don't do those all the time, but for some reason we were doing a check-in. So we were going around the room. How are you feeling? How are you feeling? And I thought I'd keep it real. And so instead of just saying, I'm feeling great, I said, well, I'm going to be honest with all of you. Today, I'd really rather be teaching math, where 1 + 1 = 2. Now, nobody needs to worry that I'm going to go quit. I'm going to find my energy this weekend. I'll be back on Monday, but I need this weekend to find my energy. And everybody was super nice, like, oh, what's going on? And they also knew some of the things that were happening during the week and why it had been a hard week. Anyway, usually at the end of the day, Satya and I connect. This is, again, back when we were in person at the end of the day. But he called me that day. And in retrospect, he was probably trying to get out and go somewhere. It was a Friday, but I still happened to be in the office. And he said, oh, are you still in the office? And I said, yes. He said, no, I'll come back up there. I said, no, it's fine. He said, well, I just want to make sure after your comment today that you were okay. And I said, no, I'm fine. I said, that's why I said, I'm going to get my energy. I'm going to come back on Monday. I wasn't trying to say it otherwise. But yeah, today I am feeling like teaching math sounds like a great career. And we hung up the phone, and 5 minutes later, standing in my doorway is Satya. And I know what he did is he turned around, he parked the car, he came up the elevator, and he just wanted to make sure that I was okay. And again, we spent 5-10 minutes and then that was it. But the fact that he turned around, that he parked the car, that he came up, that we had that time together, again, zooming out and saying, at the end of this, what are we going to remember? And what's the purpose and what's the mission, and kind of reminding me about that. And the fact that he took the time to do that, it made a big difference. A big enough difference that I'm remembering it as I tell you this story right now.
I mean, there's a lesson in that for all of us. Him caring to that degree where he's turning the car around and coming back and just like, I want to make sure you're okay. And also on your part, Kathleen, being transparent about where you were at. And I know we talk about that a lot, encouraging employees to be open with their manager about where they are so that they can support them as humans. We'd love to hear a little bit more. I know, especially the last 18 months, 2 years, you've certainly seen a lot, heard a lot from our employees about where managers have really stepped up in caring. What are some other things that managers can do to illustrate care for the people on their team?
I would start with listen. I mean, on some level, I've told you some of these bigger moments that I really remember, but not every moment has to be that big or that profound. It really can just be taking the time to listen, making the time to have a one-on-one, starting the meeting with, how are you doing? What's going on with you? If somebody asks for help, following up. If somebody really needs help with prioritization, taking the time to really help them prioritize. It doesn't always have to be, as much as I love the story about driving around with the balloons and all of that, sometimes it can be just acknowledging in the moment. I think about how many times team members are presenting and, taking the time at the end versus racing off because we've got the next meeting to say, by the way, that was really well done. Mm-hmm. There's power in that. People want to be, myself included, valued and seen. People don't want to feel like what they're doing doesn't matter, that they're invisible. So just remembering to take the time to make sure that people are valued and seen. And the other key thing I think you can do to show people you really care is to honestly give them helpful input and feedback. I think sometimes we think, care means I'm just always saying how great you are. No, if you care enough, it's my example I had before. If you care enough, it's to say, this isn't your best work, and here's what I think you could do to make it better, because I do care about you. I want you to be successful. I want you to reach your potential. So I think that's caring too.
Absolutely. So you have shared incredible stories about the important role managers play in so many different ways. As we look ahead to the rest of FY22 and beyond, what's next for managers?
Certainly, on one level, I'd say it's continuing to model coach care. I would say that's something we have to continue to earn and get better at, myself included. I reflect on model coach care. And when am I really role modeling the values and the growth mindset? When am I not? When am I truly helping coach versus I'm just coming in and asserting and knowing when you need to do one versus the other? The model coach care continues. How do we think about that in the context of the new modern world of work? How do we think about that in the context of hybrid? How are we going to navigate teams where some people are remote and some people are in the office? How do we drive inclusive teams that innovate, that still have this amazing culture in this new world? And it's a huge opportunity. But that's what our managers are going to really need to help us with, so we can continue to innovate, continue to deliver, and do that while we're trying to navigate this new hybrid model. So I find it extremely exciting, but I also know it's challenging. And so it's going to be something that we're going to have to work at and try to figure out what tools we can give managers. I know we came out with the team norms. We're now talking about team diagnostics and different tools that we can give managers to empower them versus just set more expectations on them. I think as managers, we're all getting so many expectations on us. And how can we try to help lift some of those expectations and empower them in ways that help them versus just demand more from them? And whether it be giving them great tools or great trainings, or even trying to build it into, our products themselves. I think with teams and stuff, the more we can use our data to drive insights to then operationalize it in our tools, hopefully that can help managers. I'm excited about some of the things we've done as it relates to the 5-minute delay or just things like that can empower managers as they try to navigate this new world of work. And then modeling what this new hybrid means is going to be really important for managers too, because people will look to their manager to set the tone. And actually, as I'm doing this podcast, I'm literally sitting in Wisconsin. I flew here for a wedding, which was great. I got to see my cousins and my parents and my sisters, and I flew on a Thursday. And literally, as I'm landing, Sach is calling me, and I text him, I'm flying, and I'll call you when I land. And I called him once I was in the Milwaukee airport, and I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't saying, I wasn't pretending that I had just taken a walk and I'm calling him from, my office. I said, hey, sorry, I was flying. I'm going to see my sister. I'll be on the SLT tomorrow from Wisconsin. And I was kind of excited because I realized I was able to be productive. I was getting my work done, and I was getting to participate in this wedding. So how do we create that sense of empowerment, that sense of team norms? And at the same time, how do we as employees also be flexible enough? So when can I be flexible and do what I just did? And then when do I know I need to be in the office because we've got some key board meeting or customer meetings? So if it goes both ways between managers and employees, I really think this hybrid can be something better than what it was and what it is.
Isn't it incredible, the mindset shift that is happening?
It's unbelievable. It is. My own mindset has changed. It is different. And because we've had our team norms discussion as an SLT, and I think Sach has been very clear. Look, I don't expect y'all to be in the office, and I want us to embrace the hybrid, and we'll be together when we need to be. And I also want people to role model the hybrid in a role that can do that. I also want to acknowledge that there are certain roles that don't have the flexibility. They have to be on site, and super grateful for the employees working in those roles.
I'm just going to put in a shameless plug here, Kathleen. The team norms that you're talking about are team agreements, and those are a resource on flexibility at Microsoft. So anyone can go in and pull up this resource. We highly encourage managers to do this with your teams. Even now, we were waiting for a while. We thought maybe this is something that's only applicable when we open up back to the way things used to be, but there's no way things used to be anymore. And people are really craving the certainty now. And we're finding that the teams that are doing this really get the freedom that you were just talking about to know how to prioritize.
I love that you highlighted that, Christina, because I do think it makes a huge difference if people are intentional. I think that's the whole opportunity for managers, is to be intentional about when they do need to be together as a team. So then people can plan around and have that open space for when the team doesn't have to be together, and mix shift and decide when they want to do their work. And that just creates a lot of flexibility.
So we like to close every episode with one question. If you could give managers one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't I have to say model, coach, care? How could I not say model, coach, care? My other piece of advice would be, which I give to, I think, employees broadly and myself, work will fill the capacity you give it. These jobs at Microsoft are amazing. The mission is amazing. The people we work with is amazing. The platform we have. I'm so proud to be a part of this company. And you could work 24/7, just given the opportunities we have. So remember to draw the line and focus on what's important outside of work, and make sure you prioritize that and take a long-term view.
Love it.
Love that.
It's great advice. And we're so grateful to you for taking the time to share all of your stories and advice with our managers today. Thank you.
Well, I had a lot of fun talking with both of you. Thanks for all you're doing to bring different voices to managers, and hopefully from the different voices, they find something that helps them. So thank you for doing this, Nicole and Christina.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. We want to thank Kathleen Hogan for joining us today. And what is really sticking with me is the story she shared about when she was just having a bad day. She was not feeling okay, and shared with the SLT that she was like, you know what? I just kind of want to be a math teacher today. And that she shared that not only with her colleagues, but her manager, Satya, and that he turned around and came back and checked in on her, and how meaningful that was for her. And I think it's just Satya and Kathleen both role modeling what it means to be a manager, to be transparent, to care. It's such a great story.
You know, what I so appreciate about Kathleen is she's just a very vulnerable leader, and she doesn't shy away from the tough stuff for herself or for people in service of their care and growth and development. And she just makes everyone feel so included.
And that's it for another episode of Managers One-on-One. Thank you to our producers, Dave Nelson, Stacey Harris, and everyone at Lens Group Media. Until next time, I'm Nicole Christie.
And I'm Christina Watt. Thanks for joining us for Managers One-on-One. Here's to being your best as a manager and bringing out the best in everyone. For more episodes of Managers One-on-One, visit aka.ms/manager podcast. And to access your manager learning path, visit aka.ms/my required training.